Record. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Now we may have a couple folks coming in a little bit later, but I want to let you know that we're going to record today's session just in case you want to refer back to it, or if you missed any part, you can come back and watch it again. We are so honored to be able to welcome speakers today that we've never featured before. We have our Open Educational Resources SIG is going to be hosting Dr. Fahmie and Cynthia Nava. I am so excited for this presentation. This is one of my all-time top 10 pieces of information to share with folks. I remember seeing that. No, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me begin by introducing our speakers. Dr. Fahmie is an associate professor of psychology at California State University at Northridge, or CSUN. Dr. Fahmie has studied with some of the most amazing behavior analysts, and I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Fahmie when she was a student at the University of Kansas. Go Jayhawks. Dr. Fahmie also mentors an amazing generation of upcoming behavior analysts and researchers, among them our second speaker, Cynthia Nava. Cynthia Nava has just completed her master's degree at Northridge, and we are so excited that she is a behavior analyst, and I cannot wait until she is certified because we need more folks like our presenters today. I remember the first time I saw this presentation was, I believe, at San Diego, ABAI San Diego in 2018, and it was dreadfully early. I think it may have been an 8 a.m. session. And of course, it was on like a Sunday or a Monday morning, not to account for the sins of the evening before. But I left this session about students generating culturally responsive content that reflected who they were, excited and eager to attend the rest of the conference. And I hope that you too are so excited about the content that our speakers are going to share with us today. I want to give just a brief introduction and talk about a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Now, I know that some folks who are joining us today are interested in our CEs for this event. So if you are interested in CEs, please make sure that you're taking a moment just to sign into the chat box so that we know that you are here. We are going to ask you for 3 things. Sign in here at the beginning, so we have evidence of when you were here. Sign out again at the end, so that we know that you were here for the full event. We're also going to ask you to rate our event, and this is actually for everybody, because we want to know if this is the kind of content you want us to continue offering, whether there are any other topics we should be presenting, and we also want to give back to our speakers who've been so kind and generous with their time. So we hope you'll take a moment to rate our event afterwards. We expect that we are going to be sending out CE certificates for this event within 1 to 2 weeks, but if you have any trouble, please feel free to email us about that documentation. Since we are a special interest group with the Association for Behavior Analysis International, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that we regularly offer amazing CE events for our members. And they tend to be around licensing, they tend to be about educational applications, because of course we're the open licensing educational resources community. And if you're not already a member, we hope that you will join us. If you prefer, you can also follow us on Facebook, where we share news about these upcoming events. I want to talk very briefly about the learning objectives for this event. When we're done today, we hope that everyone who's participating first will be able to define open-enabled pedagogy, or OEP, and describe some of the benefits of using OERs in pedagogy. Now, if these terms are new to you, again, become a member. We've got these workshops posted where we can help you understand what an openly licensed resource is and the benefits they have for your students. Next, we want to make sure that you can define culturally responsive teaching, which is, of course, especially important always, but no more important now when we're experiencing significant challenges in our culture. And we want to make sure that behavior analysis is open and welcoming to the folks who can make us a richer and more diverse field. And then finally, describe the efficacy and social validity of peer-generated content in an undergraduate ABA course. And I am so excited because if you didn't know, this work is already published, and we'll post a link to that in the chat as well. So these are our objectives for today. I want to begin by talking about open pedagogy. So when we talk about open pedagogy, this has been defined, this has been written about for a while, but it's a set of teaching and learning practices that are possible only in the context of having these permissions that are characteristic of OER. And so this is where we talk about those 5 R's, the retain, redistribute, revise, remix, your ability to hold on to your content, to reuse it again, to combine it with other materials, to redistribute it without having to ask special permission, and finally to really make something new, building on a lot of those resources that are already created. Most of the materials that I imagine we as a community have learned from have not been open materials. They've been copywritten, all rights reserved. And so every time, for instance, we share an article with others, we're technically violating the law. Every time we, copy a chapter for a student, we are technically violating the law. There's some exceptions there with the Teach Act and in various ways, but it's very hard to understand the way in which our permissions are delineated under certain federal laws, and it makes education harder. When we're talking about open pedagogy, it's going to largely be determined by whether or not the resources and the products that you're using involve OER as a vital component of the practice. And so what I mean by that is open educational resources, remember those teaching and learning materials, any format, any medium, but they have to have that license that permits you to share and edit and redistribute with others. It respects intellectual property rights in the way that many of us as scientists do. We cite our sources, we credit the authors that we are borrowing from or remixing, but we use these resources for educational purposes because they benefit everybody. They have to have those 5 R's that I mentioned before. You have to be able to keep it. You have to be able to reuse that material for other purposes, even without asking special permission. You have to be able to revise that content, maybe to correct typos, which could exist in the slideshow that I noticed a little bit before. But since these slides will be openly licensed, I encourage you to fix that, to remix that content, combine it with others, and again, to share it with other people. And you have to have these without having to go through the effort or jump through the hoops of contacting the author every time you want to do that. Some of the Creative Commons licenses permit that. If you're not certain about Creative Commons licenses, remember you can also become one of our members, and we have workshops on what are Creative Commons licenses, how to use them, information like that. But the way that they combine with pedagogy really comes down to these conversations that many of us are probably having as educators, especially higher ed educators. This idea of disposable assignments versus renewable assignments. So a disposable assignment is one where really the purpose of the assignment is just to assess the learning of the student. So if you've ever been an educator where you have students write a paper for the purposes of marking it and giving it a grade, but you and the student both know that that paper is going to go directly into a shred box at the end of the semester or after the 1-year mandated moratorium for FERPA, then you know that that is a disposable assignment. You also probably know that that disposable assignment does not necessarily inspire students' creativity. Students aren't gearing and ready to go to write you another paper. In fact, I imagine they're very adjective heavy, and the margins are probably real wide, and maybe the spacing is 1.5 or 1.15, because the purpose is there. The motivation is very low to produce anything of value. When you move beyond, when you go a little bit further, and you want not only for the student to create an artifact to be marked, but it has some other value, maybe you start getting into authentic assignments. This could be, for instance, partnering with a community agency to help them do something, to evaluate a process, to create a report to give back to that agency. It's not necessarily public, but the student is engaging in more meaningful work because what they're doing actually has value beyond them and beyond assessing their learning. It has value for someone else. You can also do constructionist assignments. So if you've heard of the literature, for instance, related to e-portfolios, where students are creating a lot of stuff and they're sharing it with the world, this is where we might be getting into constructionist assignments, where it's generating content, it's filling a need, and it's also very public for others to share and engage in. Now, renewable assignments are incredibly challenging, and the way that they're made possible is through those open licenses. So just like you have the student creating a product, the product has value beyond just that student's learning, it can help others. The material is public, other people can get to it. But when you add an open license to it, it means that other people can be building on that. So for instance, students start a wiki in one semester, and then students in the next semester are editing and refining and revising the wiki from semester 1. Students in semester 3 are coming back and they're adding in openly licensed images. They're adding in video content. And so you can see it kind of grows and morphs and creates this wonderful thing that everyone can be involved with that can improve the quality of learning for everyone. Now, there are some examples of this. I'm going to touch on them very, very briefly, but if you want to know more, you have to become a member. So come become a member. If you are asking students to create new artifacts using OER, you might be doing OEP. If you have that artifact having value beyond the learning of the author, that could be OEP. If students are invited to share their materials with others, you're getting a little bit closer, but only when students are invited to openly license that material using one of those Creative Commons licenses are you truly getting at OEP. And I want to stop here for a moment, and I want to ask the audience whether they understand why have I said whether students are invited to openly license their materials. So just a moment of participation. I've heard that awkward silences are helpful to encourage participation.
I'll admit I apologize. I just had to go run a USB, so I missed the prompt.
So why am I saying we are inviting students to openly license their materials? And Shanna has it right there. Students have to have the option to say no, because ultimately the things that students create, they're the student's intellectual property. It's not our decision to make. So again, you can see how the spirit of this really is to honor the intellectual property rights of everybody involved, not necessarily to create rules that says other people can't, but to invite everybody to be invested in creating. So as I mentioned, we have a few examples of OEP and behavior analysis. Those of you who know Dr. Pavone, she's got an upcoming openly licensed book called Special Topics in Behavior Analysis. So I hope you'll follow us because we're going to talk about that as the months go on and into the fall. No pressure, Dr. Pavone. We also have Bearded Behaviorist, who's one of our biggest fans and one of our best members. If you've followed him on Facebook and you see his memes, or if you've listened to his Oh Behave podcast, then you may not know that all of that stuff that he's doing is actually in service to preparation for the exam. So these are ways for Brian to study, and he's sharing that with the world. So that's a really excellent example of OEP. We have an upcoming open glossary project where we want to create examples of behavior analysis that we can share with others. Again, become a member to find out more. And I've done some research over the last couple of years, just inviting undergraduate students, just like we're going to see today in this amazing presentation from Dr. Fahmie and Cynthia, inviting students to create their own content. But that is not the focus for today. I encourage you to join our SIG and find out more. Now, I want to turn the presentation over to the real stars of the show, Dr. Fahmie and Cynthia Nava, who are going to talk to us about culturally responsive learning materials.
Thanks so much, Veronica. As excited as you are to have us, I think we are, I can speak for Cynthia, I'm sure, on this one, very excited to be here and be invited to speak to everybody, and just inspired by the work you're doing. I think it's amazing that this SIG exists and that there are more and more open educational resources becoming available in behavior analysis. So thanks so much. I'm just going to do a quick bookend. Cynthia is going to be the real star of the show in the study and the project that we put together. She's going to describe it to you all, but I'm going to do a quick bookend to kind of first introduce why I even became interested in this topic. And then at the end, I'm going to talk, if there's time, a little bit about some of the extensions that we're planning for this project, because as Veronica mentioned, this was something that was recently published. So this study is over, but we're working on the next steps. So the thing I love about teaching behavior analysis, and those of you who are also teaching introductory behavior analysis courses, I know you can relate to this. It's when you see the light bulbs go off, because in behavior analysis, everything you're teaching is applicable to the students that you're working with. And so whether the student's in the role of a parent, a teacher, a sibling, you know, an employee, an employer, everything is relating. They're relating it back to their everyday life, which is so cool. There aren't many topics that you can teach where everything relates to the students' lives. And so with that, I feel like comes this kind of insatiable appetite on behalf of undergrads and graduate students to hear more and more personal examples of the behavioral principles acting in, for instance, my everyday life. So what I've found over the years of teaching has been that, you know, I started using kind of the standard textbook examples of things, but now I've evolved to including a ton of personal examples of the behavioral principles in my lectures and when I do tests and so forth. And I've tried to, as best as possible, diversify those examples, but when it comes down to it, it's the examples from my lived experiences. So a few years ago, back when I was introduced to Cynthia, I guess this was like 4 years ago, she was an undergraduate student and she was enrolled in a program that she'll highlight on, I think, the second slide, called Build Poder, which is to increase the diversity of students who are able to seek research positions and do, you know, higher education and research. And so with that mentorship opportunity came some training in culturally responsive practices. And there it occurred to me that it would be much more effective if the examples that I was providing to students of the behavioral principles in their lives were actually generated by those students to represent a variety of different lived experiences. So I'll have Cynthia start the slideshow here just to highlight the definition of culturally responsive teaching. So culturally responsive teaching, this is defined by Gay in 2002 as using cultural characteristics, experiences, and perspectives of ethnically diverse students as conduits for teaching them more effectively. It's based on the assumption that when academic knowledge and skills are situated within the lived experiences and frames of reference for students, they're more personally meaningful, have higher interest appeal, and are learned more easily and thoroughly. And so as someone who is teaching in California with a wide range of people from various backgrounds in my classes, and I sometimes have up to 230 undergrads in my intro ABA class, I realized how much of a disservice I was doing to students who don't share my background when I was just giving them examples from my personal experiences. So with that came this project that Cynthia really spearheaded, which was to start having students create examples of behavioral principles in their everyday lives, and then have the option to share those with future classes. So from an OEP perspective, we wanted to kind of curate this bank of examples that could be used with the students' permission in future classes, either embedded in my lectures or created as supplemental practice opportunities for the students. And then from a culturally responsive teaching perspective, I just wanted to add more diverse lived experiences to the teachings in the introductory class. Because if you think about it, most of the textbooks, the introductory textbooks we use in behavior analysis, the ones that everybody adopts, are from middle-aged white males. So that's their perspectives as well in those examples. So I just wanted to diversify the examples that students got access to, hoping that we could help more people see how behavior analysis operates in their lives. So before turning things over to Cynthia, I just want to highlight how compatible OEP and CRT are when you're having the content generated by the actual students who are recipients of the education. All right, over to you, Cynthia.
Okay. Everyone can hear me fine, right? Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you for attending this presentation. As Dr. Fahmie and Veronica introduced, I am Cynthia Nava, and today I'll be sharing the results of a study that explored one way to teach behavior analytic concepts with diversity in mind. So specifically, the study was an evaluation of the effect of peer-generated multimedia examples in an undergraduate applied behavior analysis course. So first, I'd like to thank the National Institutes of Health and the Diversity Program Consortium. The undergraduate research program that Dr. Fahmie mentioned earlier is called Build Poder, and they funded this project and of course allowed me to enter into the world of research. So you all probably remember your first undergraduate course in behavior analysis and just that excitement that you felt when you discovered the foundational principles for the first time. So those same foundational principles have been used to inform best practice in teaching college students. For instance, what Skinner referred to as individualized and programmed instruction consists of frequent opportunities to practice responding, assessment of performance and immediate feedback, pacing that requires personal mastery of one concept before moving to another, carefully selected prompts and explicit programming for discrimination, generalization, and maintenance. A combination of these strategies have been shown in several studies to produce better learning outcomes than conventional methods that assume that concepts will be learned through reading textbooks, attending lectures, and completing assessments infrequently and often with very delayed feedback like you might find in a typical college classroom with like just one midterm and a final. So one variable of effective instruction that hasn't been studied much by other behavior analysts is culturally responsive teaching. Dr. Fahmie defined that earlier, and just as a reminder, one way to engage in culturally responsive teaching is to allow students of diverse backgrounds to share their perspectives and experiences. We designed what we called the Behavior Analysis in Real Life project, or BAIRL, to accomplish 3 goals. So first, we sought to develop examples of the behavioral principles operating on the lives of college students. In doing so, we sought to ensure that those examples were representative of the students in CSUN's classrooms. Therefore, we used a strategy called peer-generated content, whereby the examples of behavioral principles were created by students and for students. Second, we sought to integrate mainstream technologies into the collection and the distribution of our examples. We used a mobile application and online learning management system similar to that found in most modern college classrooms. Third, we sought permission from the content creators to reuse this content in future semesters. Our project is only one example of how open educational resources can be created and applied, but we hope that it can serve as a model for those looking to use open-enabled pedagogy to guide their own classroom materials. So we also designed a study to compare the traditional textbook content to the peer-generated multimedia content and assess its influence on students' concept acquisition, preference, and ratings of social validity, including ratings of relevance, diversity, and cultural sensitivity. But before we get into the details of the study, I want to provide you all with a brief overview of how we collected these examples. So in a graduate course, students were given the assignment that you see here on the screen. They were asked to capture a picture or video example of the behavioral principles operating on their everyday life. They were then asked to caption the example using a catchy title and provide a thorough description of how the picture or video exemplified that behavioral concept. They submitted these media with captions and descriptions using a cell phone, and the app on the cell phone was called D-Scout. The app allowed us to provide students with missions to send them on a search for various behavioral principles throughout the course, and it also allowed the students to complete the assignment in the moment and on the go. So 42 master students participated in the development of the examples, and the instructor of the master students, so Dr. Fahmie, delivered an extra credit assignment in which students were asked to capture 10 video or picture examples of behavioral concept in their everyday lives. So although the assignment only called for the submission of 10 examples each for full credit, these 42 students submitted over 800 examples, possibly because they found the activity itself reinforcing, and this was actually reported to us in multiple cases. The examples showed a wide range of cultural practices, ages, identities, societal roles, relationships, and particularly interesting were a lot of the different family dynamics. We saw a lot of like single parent households, caretaking of extended family, things like that. We also saw a range of species. So we saw like turtles, bunnies, fish, birds, and then of course like the standard dogs and cats. We also invited students to share the examples publicly for future courses, conferences, and platforms like this one now. And all but 2 students actually granted us permission to share their submissions. So the study evaluating the efficacy and validity of these examples included 46 undergraduate students who were enrolled in an upper division behavior analysis course. These students attended California State University Northridge, or CSUN, which is a Hispanic and minority serving institution. All students were psychology majors, and just to give you a sense of the diversity of the sample, 62% of students in the psychology department at CSUN are from traditionally underserved backgrounds. The diversity and background of students in this master's program who developed the examples generally matched that of the undergraduate program, with one main difference being on average an older age for the master's students. The course itself consisted of a 75-minute lecture and a 50-minute seminar. So all 46 students attended the lecture simultaneously, and then they broke into 2 groups of 23 and attended separate seminar sections following the lecture. The instructor of all the lectures and seminars was, again, Dr. Fahmie. The 2 independent variables in the study were the traditional textbook examples and the peer-generated examples that I just described. So Dr. Fahmie used Martin and Pear's behavior modification, what it is and how to do it, as the traditional textbook. For instance, an example of extinction from this textbook is the following. A husband and wife are standing in the kitchen just after the husband comes home from work. The husband complains about the traffic. The wife goes about preparing supper and does not pay attention to his comments about the traffic. The scenario continues in the textbook, and it's used to exemplify extinction. The peer-generated examples look something like this. So this is an example of extinction that was submitted by a student. The caption was throwing a fit, and the description read, the reinforcer, attention from grandma for a previously reinforced behavior, whining, is withheld. Produces a brief extinction burst, as you can see, but results in a decrease in whining in the future. So here are just a few screenshots of some of the many submissions that we received. My favorite example is in the middle here. It's the little box that the bunny is sitting in. It's serving as a discriminative stimulus for the bunny's behavior of relieving himself. This video submission is from a grad student, and it actually addresses multiple concepts in one video. So let me make sure the audio is playing. And
okay, time to start my night. Well, toss it, tie it, grab it, walk down the stairs and look in the mirror, and keep going down the stairs. Go to your keys, grab your keys, they have the red thing. Go to the door, unlock it, open it, walk around the corner, walk down the stairs. Don't think about how scary your garage is. Get your keys ready just in case. Don't bring that to your face. Open up the gate. Go to the dumpster. Open it up. Drop just the trash in, not your keys. Don't put them in this time. Check for them. You're good. Walk back upstairs. Don't think about any murderers that could be around. Okay, cool. Wait, what is that? I do have a grout fit. Alright, time to put that away. That smells fresh. And I'm fresh out of patience for folding. Welcome to the chair. Okay, now it's time for bed. What is that? Has that been on my face all day? Alright, these worked last time, but I wonder if it'll work without this guy. Yeah. Why is having skin so much money? If I put all this stuff on and it still works, then maybe I don't have to spend as much money next time. We'll see. Oh, well, that's crucial, clearly. I wonder how many hours of my life I've spent doing this. Are all the parts necessary? I know this one is. Okay, and we're done. Okay, finally time to turn in. I have my doctor. I have my chair full of clothes. I have to do that video for class.
all right, so I know you're all wondering, and yes, he is that funny in person. So now we're going to examine our evaluations.
Answer one quick question that was in there.
Yeah.
So I was going to mention that in this study it was the graduate students who we knew had mastered the concepts who created the examples. But what Cynthia is not going to show in this study, and what's not included in the publication, is that after the study, we also had the undergrad submit their everyday examples as part of an extra assignment. And I will say that some of them, it was at the end of their introductory class, but were just as amazing, and some just as creative as this, even though they had just finished taking their first class in behavior analysis. So I learned not to underestimate the ability of new people to behavior analysis in creating some really incredible examples.
Okay. So we're going to examine our evaluations next. The first evaluation was of the efficacy of these examples on the students' learning of the behavioral concepts. So I know Dr. Fahmie kind of just spoke to that, but we'll get into the details. So the design of the study was a combination of multiple probe design and between groups design. There were 4 topics with multiple concepts each that were included in the analysis, and they were respondent conditioning, reinforcement, antecedent control, and punishment/extinction. For each new topic, students attended a lecture simultaneously to introduce the new topic, and then they split into those 2 seminars to practice the topic. So during the seminars, when students received the extra peer-generated examples. Each separate seminar began with a 5-minute question and answer session. Following this, the seminar either received a collection of the peer-generated examples to browse or straight into an assessment. The order of delivery of these 2 activities varied by seminar, such that only 1 seminar had received the IB prior to the assessment, and for each new topic, this order switched. So let me provide a little more detail on these 2 activities. For the peer-generated examples, we gave students approximately 15 minutes to browse an online bank of examples like what you see here. They were housed in the learning management system, Canvas, and each student logged in on a personal computer, tablet, or mobile device, saw a collection of pictures and videos with catchy titles, clicked on the examples, and then were shown a description of how that image exemplified the concept that they were currently learning. So this video here was an example of motivating operations, and it depicts a girlfriend trying to get a bite of her partner's croissant and being denied access, which actually motivates her to continue pestering him, or it has been reinforced in the past. One of the main aspects of the assessment that we constructed was to measure the concept identification. So concept identification is defined as selecting the correct concept when given an example. For concept identification, we used multiple choice questions in which the stem of the question was an example of a concept from a popular introductory textbook. And for this, we used 5 textbooks that were not the course textbook by Martin and Perry. Each question had 3 answer alternatives. 2 answer options were different possible concepts, and 1 answer option was that the question stem was not an example of blank. For each topic, we programmed for 2 possible errors or incorrect answers: overgeneralization, in which the learner identifies non-examples as examples, and undergeneralization, in which the learner identifies examples as non-examples. For each of the 4 topics, there were 5 multiple choice and 1 open-ended question. The assessment was repeated 6 times across the semester, once prior to any teaching as a baseline, and once following the lecture on each of the 4 topics, and then a final assessment at the end of the semester, 8 weeks following the teaching of the 4th and final topic. These students did not receive any individual feedback on their performance on these assessments, and the assessment scores did not influence the students grading the course. However, students were eligible for a lottery drawing for gift cards to the on-campus dining if the entire seminar improved their average assessment score. These first graphs will depict the students' performance on multiple choice questions or concept identification, which are presented as the % correct for each seminar across these 6 assessments. Each panel shows responding on a single topic, which we will summarize momentarily. From this perspective, however, you can see how we stagger the teaching of topics following baseline assessments and continue to probe maintenance of performance until our final follow-up assessment 8 weeks after the teaching of topic 4. On all graphs, seminar 1 will be represented by the black symbols, and seminar 2 will be represented by the white symbols. To quickly summarize the data, we created these bar graphs, which will show the % of change from the first assessment, so baseline, to the assessment that occurred immediately following teaching, the shaded sections. The asterisk over the bars indicates exposure to the independent variable, i.e. the peer-generated examples prior to the assessment. So if access to the peer-generated content was substantially better than the textbook alone, we should see the bars with the asterisk higher than the bars without. So during teaching of the first topic, both seminars improved performance on the assessment. Seminar 2 received the peer-generated examples before the assessment, and Seminar 1 reviewed them after the assessment. Despite receiving the IV prior to the assessment, Seminar 2 did not have a higher change score than Seminar 1. Topic 2 was reinforcement, and an examination of the change scores reveals similar results to that of Topic 1 in that there was no improvement in responding following exposure to the examples. At this point, we had replicated the non-effect of our IV, so we considered that one limitation was that we only had exposure to examples with no guidance for critical thinking. Therefore, in the next 2 implementations of the peer-generated example component, we added a flowchart to guide students' interaction with the materials. So the flowchart looked like this, and it consisted of questions that could be answered by the students as they reviewed the peer-generated examples. The flowchart is an example of what was used to teach punishment and extinction, so topic 4. The questions start, what is the behavior, what is the consequence, and so on. And we provided a flowchart with each peer-generated example, but there were no requirements for the students' use of the flowchart, and the behavior wasn't tracked in our study. Topic 3 was antecedent control, which included the concept of discriminative stimuli and motivating operations. Teaching improved the scores across both seminars, with slightly better improvement in Seminar 2, who received the enhanced IV. Topic 4 was extinction and punishment. Performance in Seminar 1 was consistently better than performance in Seminar 2 in baseline. The enhanced IV did not show a favorable effect for this topic, and therefore we did not replicate the small effect of the enhanced IV that we saw with Topic 3. Across all topics, both seminars had greater than chance performance on baseline measures and showed improvement in the final follow-up assessment. Each bar represents mean performance across the seminar, and data points show individual performance. We saw decreases in errors of undergeneralization, but not of overgeneralization. This means that students did a better job identifying the examples as examples, but continued to identify non-examples as examples too. So our second evaluation was of the student's preference for the textbook versus peer-generated examples. The evaluation occurred after the 5th assessment of our efficacy evaluation, but prior to our final follow-up assessment. We used a concurrent chains arrangement to assess students' preferences. Following the standard teaching of the 3 new topics and prior to a classroom test of these topics, we gave students an online preference assessment in which they could select between 3 initial links, so a textbook example of the topic, a peer-generated example of the topic, or a peer-generated example plus the flowchart. There were 9 total choice points, 3 new topics with 3 initial links each. And in this video, you can see what the students saw during the preference assessment. Pretty cool, right? So these are the representative data of the 3 general patterns of selection that emerged in our preference assessment. Each graph shows a single student's cumulative selection of textbook examples, so the open circles, and peer-generated examples as the closed squares. The peer-generated examples with a flowchart are the open triangles. 12 students showed mixed preference with either equal selection of all 3 options or exclusive but mixed preference of 2 of the 3 options. 7 students showed strong or moderate preference for peer-generated examples, and 21 students, so majority of the sample, showed strong or moderate preference for peer-generated examples plus the flowchart. Notably, no student showed preference for textbook examples, despite the fact that the textbook examples were new examples of the concepts that the students hadn't yet read in their course text by Martin and Pear. Our final analysis was of the social validity of our independent variables. Using a survey that immediately followed the preference assessment, students were asked to rate the extent to which they found the examples relatable to their everyday life, diverse, and culturally sensitive. These graphs display the results for ratings of textbook examples as white bars and peer-generated examples as black bars. The Likert scale ranges from a score of 1, meaning not at all, to a score of 7, meaning highly. Number of students is on the x-axis. And the data show that overall, students rated the peer-generated examples as more relatable, diverse, and culturally sensitive compared to the textbook examples. So in sum, our evaluation of efficacy showed no consistent difference of the effects of peer-generated versus textbook examples. However, students generally preferred the peer-generated examples and rated them to be more relatable, diverse, and culturally sensitive than the textbook examples. So I'd like to close by discussing some limitations of the current study and the ways that we have considered improving our independent variable in the future to affect concept acquisition. So first, we merely provided access to examples and flowcharts and didn't require any active responding beyond browsing on part of the students. Miller et al. And many other behavior analysis consider active responding a crucial part of concept acquisition. So in the future, we can use the peer-generated examples to design self-quizzes or to prompt flowchart completion with feedback. Second, our peer-generated examples provided a lot of extra exposure to examples of concepts, but did not include any exposure to non-examples. So perhaps this limitation accounts for the students' continued errors on questions approach for overgeneralization. Finally, this study was conducted in an upper division course, and many of the students had some exposure to the behavioral principles in a lower division course of the psychology major. Our baseline assessment showed greater than chance responding on all topics, but perhaps this produced some ceiling effects. Future research should evaluate the effect of this intervention with students who are completely naive to behavioral concepts and learning them for the first time. Despite these limitations, we feel that the study adds to the research by elucidating the boundary conditions of components of programmed instruction. That is, we showed exposure to extra examples alone is unlikely to improve concept acquisition. Perhaps more importantly, this study may serve as a model for one way to represent diverse students' perspectives in the college classroom. Using peer-generated examples has the benefit of showing multiple perspectives from different backgrounds, increasing student engagement in their own learning, and perhaps helping to close the achievement gap, which is a term for the difference in performance between students from underserved backgrounds and their peers. We cannot include this in our analysis because the gap did not historically exist in this specific course, but we do believe that using a model like the one that we've created in a classroom where the gap does exist would allow students to see their own lives reflected in the learning material and possibly provide greater incentives to learn and increase classroom performance. As we mentioned in our earlier goals of the study, using peers to generate content is one great way to create open educational resources and reduce the barriers that students from diverse backgrounds typically face, like having to drop courses or receive lower grades due to not being able to afford the course materials. We didn't assess these effects in our study, but when considering the research suggesting the positive effects of open-enabled pedagogy in combination with the social validity results that we found, we can see how necessary it is to expand the current base of open educational resources. We hope that other researchers will consider creating their own banks of peer-generated content to match the culture of their own universities for use in future courses. So thank you again for attending, and we can now open up for questions or move to the closing statements.
Nice job, Cynthia. That was awesome.
That was absolutely amazing. So we definitely have time for questions for our speakers. 5-6 minutes or longer if you're willing to share that time with us. For folks who have questions, please type them in the chat box, or if you'd like to grab the mic, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'll go ahead and add mine through the mic if that's all right. But my question has to do with, as your students were creating these peer-generated examples, did they go ahead after creation and upload them into Canvas where peers could see them immediately upon upload, or did you all have a filter first to check that they were in fact appropriate and accurate examples? How did you go about that?
Yes. No, they did not immediately upload them. They submitted them and they got grades on them. And then we selected the ones that we felt were really well representative of the principals, because there were some errors, there were some errors. And then it's funny that you mentioned a filter. One thing that I didn't think I'd have to explicitly put in my assignment that I later learned I should, for the undergrads who submitted their examples, I started receiving some examples from private locations like the bathroom, and of things that otherwise you probably wouldn't talk to your professor about. I won't mention what those things are, but I had to be very clear with them that I mean, they were really taking this very seriously, that the examples went into their everyday lives. And I, said, well, also consider the professionalism of some of the things that you're uploading. So I didn't have that problem too much, but I added a little statement of professionalism on the assignments in the future when I started receiving some of those bathroom selfies. It did take some time to kind of curate that bank that we ended up delivering in this study. But in terms of like prep time for a course, it wasn't any, for how many great examples they gave and the opportunities for students to get that supplemental material, it wasn't any more time than, a regular assignment prep.
We have some questions in the chat. Do you want me to read them?
Sure.
Okay. So from Shayna Hornstein, what did you have the students sign so that you could use their assignments in the study and in other classes?
Yeah, great question. So all of the students were invited to share their examples, and we gave them several different options of how they were shared. And I'm still learning a bit about open-enabled pedagogy too. I was telling Veronica this in the beginning of the call about how open licensing is different than just sharing and making public. So we had kind of a consent form for the study that was just for the IRB of the study, but then we also had a separate at the end, forgetting the name of it, but basically the whether or not they wanted to share their examples with current students, with future students, in public settings like a conference, in settings where it was not only public but could be shared over and over, like on YouTube or a webinar. So we gave them multiple options of how their materials were shared. And in both of the classes, so the graduate class had, I think, 46 students, only 2 students opted not to share. So the majority of students in both the graduate and the undergraduate level were very willing to share their materials, and they were excited about the fact that future students would be getting access to these while they were learning. So that was kind of neat. And I made it very clear that their option to share had nothing to do with their grade in the class, and we had it in a sealed envelope that Cynthia took away that I couldn't even see, so they didn't feel like there was any coercion in terms of how they responded to that. And it was just a paper that they signed.
So Veronica posted this one from, I think, Valeria. I'm wondering if there was more participation during classroom discussion for the people who created videos versus students who weren't asked to share videos.
I don't know. I didn't actually consider that, but it's very possible. My answer would just be biased because it wasn't something that I thought of as we were doing it. Do you remember, Cynthia? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't know that we really measured that.
Yeah, that would be another interesting variable to look at. And it was part of the goals of the project. Like, we wanted students to really be invested in this material. And so that's one way to kind of measure their investment, is how willing they are to participate. I love that idea.
Cheryl Young Pelton asked about the timeline for creating the group assignment.
The group assignment wiki, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to there. But for creating the examples, for submitting the examples, is that what your question is?
Well, and also when Veronica was talking about her wiki. So, but yours with the group assignment, and I heard you mention that it was no longer than a regular assignment. But how long was that? So I'm just confused.
To develop the bank of examples that I then gave.
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
Got it. So we developed it in Canvas, and it took a little bit extra time because of how many different behaviors we were measuring for the study. So that, I will say, Cynthia spent a lot of time creating these like quizzes in Canvas that were kind of overlaid on top of the examples, just to track which examples the students were looking at and how they rated them. And we had a million DVs that we never actually reported in the study just because they were too cumbersome to summarize in the end. But I would say that putting the examples in Canvas and then having them click on them and linking them to the description, I mean, it would probably take, I guess it depends on how many you're putting in there, but somewhere between like 5 and 8 hours to put it all together. It's a day's work.
And you said, can I just jump in again?
Yeah.
You said they were better at examples than non-examples?
Yeah, they performed better on the assessments with identifying examples as examples. We gave them really close in non-examples, and they overgeneralized and identified those as examples too.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're doing now, we're replicating this, we're extending this study now, and we're actually providing non-examples as well.
So I wonder if that's typical of practitioners as well out in the field.
It's very possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Wondered.
I don't know, but yeah, I would imagine it would be similar, similar errors being made. Yeah.
So that's your next study.
Right?
Beyond. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And for some of the alternative projects like wiki projects, those are pretty common in related fields or in other open pedagogy preparations.
Rachel Potter asked if students consent for their examples to be used only among their class group. Oh, did they consent there or only among the OERs in general? In which case, how can we get our greedy little professorial paws on them?
Oh, so this is a common question. I've actually had several faculty reach out about this and get excited about it and ask if they could also have the bank of examples, which technically I could share with them given how the permissions that I received from these students. But one like kind of disclaimer and one reason why I'm hesitant to just say, here's the bank of examples is because one of the big points of this project was to have examples that were representative of the students who I teach. And that might not be the same representation in the students you teach. So I got contacted from someone in New Zealand and I was like, okay, you know, in New Zealand, I'm guessing that the backgrounds are going to be really different. And so we have all of these examples of like sitting in traffic, which is common to LA, not so much in New Zealand. We had a lot of like, you know, there's a lot of Latinx families who have grandparents as caregivers. There were a lot of grandparents as caregiver examples. Or just other cultural things that maybe someone in New Zealand would not connect with. So I would actually recommend as opposed to getting examples, which I'm happy to share some as like if you want kind of a jumping board, I would recommend doing the assignment in your own population so that you're generating examples that are representative of the population you're serving.
And I can quickly answer the earlier question from Shayna about the child's assent. We kind of left that up to the people who were in our class. Like they provided the consent for everything. So if it was, I think in that case, it was like her little sister, she would have had to like check with her family and we didn't explicitly go out and look for that.
That brings up an important concern that we didn't consider that I think we should. I did tell people who are submitting examples not to include any clients that they had, but they were able to include family members. And I did explicitly say when you're including family members, make sure that they are consenting to be on this video and submitted for the assignment. But when it came down to sharing the examples, I doubt they went back and asked them if they could be shared. And so I think that's a really important thing that we need to keep in mind for the future.
Maggie Pavone asked if there was any pushback from the university admin.
Nope. I'd be curious to hear why you think there might be. Because maybe there's something I wasn't thinking about that if the university admin had seen the project, they would have pushed back on.
I can understand where that might develop. So for instance, at IRB pushback or pushback from, for instance, a registrar or the person who's responsible for maintaining FERPA, I could imagine that there could be some concerns there. But I think anyone who's doing this project who is actually taking the time to speak to their students about what those permissions mean or to talk about what that licensing means, who's taking the time to actually have those conversations with their students about being joint content creators is likely, you know, doing the due diligence to, in good conscience, do this project.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I think from our IRB, they didn't give us a difficult time. I made it pretty clear to them that I was planning on using these things as an educational tool, whether or not the study was conducted. So that, you know, that in some ways helped them put it in context. And I obviously had a number of ways in which we ensured that the students' educational experience was not changed by the project itself. So for instance, the whole reason why we did the design the way we did, where one group got the examples before the assessment and the second group got them after, is because I didn't want to do a real control group, which would have been cleaner, but like where one group didn't get the examples and the other group got them. Then I would be putting one seminar randomly at a disadvantage for understanding the course material. So we had to talk about some of the careful ways in which we ensured the equal educational experience of all the participants, and that we disconnected their assessment results from the course outcomes, but yet we also designed the assessment, which I'm happy to also share the assessment. We designed the assessment in a way that the students would benefit from taking it, because they had to take it repeatedly. So we included, and you don't see it in the study because it wasn't really an important part of our outcomes, but we included a self-rating on each question. They had to rate their confidence in their answer, which has been shown to change an assessment from just being an assessment to kind of a self-reflection. And it encourages some mindfulness about where the students feel with respect to the materials. And then we followed up with, when we saw people rating things as lower confidence, we were able to follow up and provide supplemental teaching on those things too. So we were pretty thoughtful about the way in which we pursued the study. That I think the IRB was totally okay. And then from an admin perspective at CSUN, because we're serving such a diverse and underserved population of students, they're always very interested in how to increase cultural sensitivity in the classroom, as well as increase the diversity of students in pursuing the master's programs and the PhD programs and so forth. So the fact that this study and this project was couched in that, I think made them very excited about it.
And there's a wonderful question here from Shanna that says, what aspects made you decide to use D-Scout for the assignment versus other tools?
Yeah, how did we even come up with D-Scout in the first place? I can't remember. We've stopped using it since, but do you remember, Cynthia, how we landed on D-Scout? Oh, I remember. You probably didn't even know this though. I participated in a study as a faculty about faculty.
I remember you saying that.
I had to do these little videos on the go about like, how are you feeling today about going into work? And what thoughts do you have today about your worst student? What thoughts do you have today about your best student? And it was like these missions they were sending to my phone, and I got like paid something to participate in this D-Scout study about faculty experiences. And it occurred to me that it was such like, it actually became fun. It was like, I was sad when it ended, because I was like, wow, this is a nice way to reflect on my life and like stop and think about how I'm feeling. And so I contacted D-Scout. I was like, do you all ever use this for not like a research study per se, not the qualitative analysis, but for gathering material, gathering resources or educational reasons? And they had never even thought about using it for educational resources. And so I negotiated with them to let me have it for free. It's really expensive, which is why I don't use it anymore. But I negotiated to get it for free. And it did really kind of make the project cool. But like I said, it's very expensive and it's not really intended for use in this way. And so now that I've replicated this for, several semesters, not in a study, just in general practice, we've just had people use their cell phones or some other, means to capture their examples and upload them. So I don't think the D-Scout component is necessary here, although it was cool to have.
And I love that these conversations are evolving, like everyone's thinking about their favorite pedagogy tools and how they could be incorporating them into a project like this.
I have heard about Flipgrid. I haven't used it yet, but I feel like that you're right. That would be probably also an easy way to showcase, right? If you were to be able to filter out if there were some errors or something. That's cool. I love it.
I don't want to bring the conversation to a close, especially if you have the time and folks are willing to stick around and have additional conversations. It would be wonderful, though, to actually continue this conversation and maybe to share some resources in our SIGS discussion group. So if you are not already a member, we would love to have you as a member. We are one of only a couple of free SIGs. So if you are a member or even not a member of ABAI, you are still welcome to be a member of our community. Again, remember, we're at openbehaviorsig.org. Link above, and I can also send it out to everyone registered today. Dr. Fahmie and Cynthia, I hope that you would consider sharing your resources, because I know everyone is very interested in getting involved in a project like this.
Sure.
One last thing that I want to share with folks, I want to make sure that we don't forget to mention that our next event is going to be in October, talking about getting students involved in content creation. We're going to be inviting Dr. Amy Nussbaum, who now listen, she's a cognitive psychologist, but we're going to invite her anyway because she is a delight. She's going to be talking about how she's actually getting students involved in annotating open resources that are already created using a program called Hypothesis. We'll be advertising this event about a month before it happens. So of course, if you are a member, we'll notify you via our discussion board, and you can also follow us on Facebook to register for the event. If you are here to earn CEs today, please don't forget to sign out. We also hope that you might consider giving us feedback about the event, because we want to make sure that we are continuing to offer high quality programming for our members. We also hope that you might take a moment to send some kind words and some praise and some things you liked about the event to the speakers, so we can share that directly with them. Anyway, if there are no other questions, we hope that you will join us next time. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here, but we'll definitely be available to answer any additional questions or to give some ideas. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Much.